Can I have?
Sure.
Yeah.
You can stay.
Okay.
It's better for the video.
Okay. Thank you very much for the introduction. So before I start my official presentation, a few words about the World Bank, which I had the pleasure of working for and still close to as a violence prevention expert or consultant or specialist, rather. What the World Bank has to do with violence is a good question because, and one we get asked often, because it's a relatively new topic for the World Bank. But over the years, as you know, the World Bank is working on development at large. So urban development, of course, structural development, social development as well. And in their interactions with clients, the World Bank Group noticed that more and more countries were finding their development hindered by violence problems. So countries like Mexico, which have amazing development, are seeing the violence as the main obstacle to a better development, and basically are lagging even from an economic perspective, but of course also from a social and human development perspective because of violence issues. So it became very clear that violence was an obstacle to development, and one of the main products that many of you must be familiar with of the World Bank is the World Development Report, which each year focuses on a specific topic. And so in 2011 it focused on violence and on how violence prevention is really a development issue, and how it must be tackled through all aspects of development. So there are definitely two different cultures, and the whole violence prevention culture is relatively recent in the World Bank, but is increasingly integrated into operations. For instance, in Central America, I know we have a colleague from GIZ in Central America, so I'm sure she'll give more detail about how violence is really an obstacle to every sort of development in such countries. And so the World Bank is developing operations, both operations on the ground in countries like Honduras or El Salvador, on violence prevention and supporting local and national governments, but also trying to integrate the violence perspective and that lens into just general operations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I'm very glad to be here also with my main responsibility, which is being the director of the European Forum for Urban Security, which is a long name, but which says a lot, and I'll try to detail all of that it says in a minute. But before I start, I'd like to, and maybe as a transition into the European Forum sort of atmosphere, I'd like to show you a little film of a conference that we held in December where many of you were or were represented, and that will be a good small introduction to my presentation. And this is if I find the right one, I think. We shall see. Sorry about, wait, maybe. Hold on. So hopefully that gives you, in pictures, a little bit of a context, but I'd like to, of course, and I'll give you a little bit more detail about, yes, thank you, about today, about both the manifesto of Aubervilliers and Saint-Denis, but also the context. Very quickly, and this is the main focus of our presentation today, is to talk about the manifesto of Saint-Denis and Aubervilliers as a political platform and a set of common values and principles for European cities today. So I'll say a few words about where the initiative came from and what EFUS is. As you mentioned, I would like to just present what the long name stands for, how the manifesto was created, what it says, and how we can use it within the European Forum, but also within a wider audience. So just a few words about the European Forum for Urban Security as an organization. It's an NGO that was founded in 1987 by mayors for mayors. So it started with a handful of mayors that met each other and realized they had a lot of common preoccupations. And it's now grown to a network of about 250 local and regional authorities. So we say cities to sort of as a generic term, but what we really mean are municipalities, larger cities, smaller cities, also some provinces, also some Länders in Germany's case. So really any subnational level of government that is interested in prevention issues. And one of the strengths of the European Forum, I think, is also bringing together members, cities that that represent the political and geographical diversity of Europe. So it's a nonpartisan platform. It's a political platform, but really nonpartisan, non-affiliated, and representing very different types of cities. We're now present in 17 countries, which you have listed here, with 7 national forums, which are these national platforms that we were talking about earlier. I think the most recent one being the German forum, but the most recent, but also one of the active ones. So that's and growing probably. The way it's run very quickly is by a board of 33 local and regional authorities that runs the organization, and with a technical staff based in Paris. So the president that you saw in the film is a mayor in Portugal, the mayor of Matosinhos, Guilherme Pinto, and the vice president is Eric Marx, our very own from the LPR. We also have a French vice president and an Italian vice president, and this is a rotating governance. And just to give you a sense that it is a very, both obviously representative board, but also diverse set of people. The objectives of the European Forum are threefold. The first is to strengthen local crime prevention policies. So the reason these mayors originally 25 years ago got together, and the reason we're still growing as a network and as an organization, is that the need for support and for exchanges of practices and exchange of expertise between cities, and the need to build stronger and more sound policies, and we will go into more detail later. The other reason was to advocate for an integrated vision of security, meaning one that is balanced between sanction, prevention, and solidarity. That was the original sort of triptych of saying it's not a question of opposing repression and prevention. It's not of some being soft on crime and hard on crime. That opposition is a false one. What we need is to work on the full, sort of the whole chain and the whole connection between the criminal justice system and between much more preventative approaches. And the local level is best placed to look at issues of social cohesion up to issues of prevention of reoffending. And the third main objective is to promote this local level, and that's why I say we bring together really all types of, and now all sizes of subnational government, because very often security issues and urban security issues were thought to be sort of, in some cases federal issues, in some cases sort of national level, and it depends on the countries, obviously. Some countries like France are much more centralized and have a very strong centralized police. Others in Belgium will have, the mayor will have much more of a direct role on the police. Situation is again different in Germany, but what we all have in common is the realization that the local level is maybe the most relevant, or at least a very relevant actor, and needs to be heard. And needs to be heard at national levels, needs to be heard at European levels, and at international levels as well. Hence the importance of having networks that represent city's position, the local position, and of course not in opposition at all, but having a platform to advocate for what local elected officials and their teams see and need to promote sound crime prevention policies. So this goes through, so the FUS is organized around exchanges of practices, the establishment of recommendations, also through sort of very concrete exchange thematic programs that we might get into more detail later, training sessions, and technical assistance. So it's a very concrete sort of set of activities based around the principles of cities helping cities. We have a small team in Paris with Sebastian and some other colleagues of ours who are in Paris, but really who serve as a platform of transfer and exchange between different sets of experts. So the manifesto was created, the manifesto that we'd like to go into a little more detail about today was presented and adopted at this conference that you hopefully got a feel for in very few minutes, but that was a conference that we organize every 5-6 years within the European Forum to bring all of our networks together. And the previous manifestos come from the previous such conferences that we held in Naples in 2000 and Saragossa in 2006, and some of you were at these moments. And so it's an evolving set of principles and recommendations building on the experience of previous not only conferences, but previous programs and previous meetings of all of our network. So now, because we had a lot of questions outside our very close circle and first circle of understanding exactly what a manifesto was and what it meant, because in our sort of internal culture it was clear, but we realized that it's not necessarily very clear. We decided to make a very short presentation of how it was written to share with you sort of the process, and then I'll go into more detail about the actual content. So hopefully I can. C'est bon? The word manifesto is very common in our language, but we felt it might need some explanation, so hopefully this will be useful. So I hope this short film helps sort of explain the process and really the idea that it's a collaborative process that it's a collaborative process that was focused, and the conference was one big moment, but it really builds on years really of dialogue and work within working groups within the forum and within other partners. And I think that's one of the interesting parts for us, is that it really brings together and sort of is a document that ties together the expertise and the needs and the positions of a whole diversity and a pretty wide range of partners that helped us throughout the process. So there were some national forums, there were some civil society organizations from different countries, some European organizations like the Center for the European Center on Probation, it's represented here, some different perspectives that sort of reflect the diversity of engagements that is necessary in a crime prevention policy according to us. So what does this manifesto say, and how does all of this sort of collective intelligence, what does all of this collective intelligence produce as a document that is, of course, not the end-all, be-all on security policies, but really a perspective from the cities on what our policies should be. One of the first key principles that's promoted within this manifesto is the idea of having a long-term strategy. We talked a lot about sustainable development and how security needed to be now integrated into a local sustainable development agenda, and very much sort of it goes back a little bit to a certain extent to the discussion on how violence prevention needs to be integrated into development agendas on a global scale. At a local level, it's very much the same issue of saying we cannot have sustainable development of cities if we're not looking at violence prevention, if we're not looking at building safe and cohesive societies. So we have to accept a long-term perspective. And too often, because security is such a visible and salient issue for a lot of citizens, we might be tempted, and cities might be tempted in sort of short-term and very visible responses that are more media-friendly and maybe respond to immediate needs of citizens, but don't provide long-term responses. So I think this idea of saying we have to act on the short term and give visible and sort of quick win results to a certain extent, but also keep in mind a long-term and mid to long-term strategy that is ensuring its sustainability is a key priority. The second, and maybe there's no really order in that we've listed these principles in, because maybe the second but most important principle is the idea that prevention is the most rational and strategic choice, and not over and not in contradiction with law enforcement or any public order measures or other forms of reducing crime, but really the focus on prevention has been neglected to a certain extent because of this need for short-term solution, and cities and our partners at this time feel that we really need to put prevention back on the forefront and to really promote it as a sound principle that is not an ideological principle and sort of not an option of being soft on crime or shying away from other solution, but on the contrary, sort of the most economical, rational choice, the best investment also for cities who are all working under constraints budgets and who, if they're looking at a long-term strategy, realize that their investment in prevention is yields much higher results from a societal perspective than short-term measures. Another key principle is the idea of citizen participation, and this is sort of sounds very obvious and sounds like we all have said that and it's written everywhere. But the idea that policies needs to be thought around citizen participation and with citizens at their core from the very diagnostic and audit phase to the evaluation, and not as a consultation stage at a later process or sort of a side and optional notion, is key and needs to be reaffirmed. The idea mostly that also all citizens need to be involved and that cities need to make a very proactive effort to include all citizens in their security policies. Because the problem with sort of very formal consultations, as many of you must have witnessed or maybe even organized, as some of us have organized, is if you organize a consultation on security, the same group type of people tend to show up, not necessarily representing all of society, and also tend to show up at a very later stage and not necessarily with a real option to influence and to change the policies that are being discussed. They're asked to validate or to just react to policies. So the idea that all citizens, including youths, of course including women, and that's the next point, but also including minorities, including some transient minorities, maybe like some illegal migrants who might be living, who even might be undocumented, but living in a city for a long time. All groups of the population need to be included also in the definition of security. And I think that's one of the interesting aspects, is that that definition of security needs to evolve with its population and therefore needs to be submitted to regular dialogue and exchange with citizens. And that is reaffirmed in this manifesto because all of us felt that it's not necessarily sufficiently respected currently. The final point, I'm going very quickly on the idea that women's rights and sexual equality must be constantly promoted because, to me, of course, that's included in citizen participation and in taking into account all all groups within sort of a larger community. The final main principle that the manifesto promotes is the idea that we must systematically evaluate security policies. Again, could be obvious, is not at all, and needs to be reaffirmed, and mostly needs to be implemented with actual methodologies, and so methodologies that need to be developed, funds that need to be allocated to the evaluation of security policies at large, and meaning also evaluating both sanctions, both the criminal justice system better, and also prevention. And to go back to the point about prevention being the most rational choice, we realize that we need, and especially in Europe, more sort of hard data on how prevention works, what works in prevention, what doesn't work, what works in local security policies in general. We have very sort of small and parcelar evaluations, and unfortunately too many of them that are coming from North America, principally from the US and Canada, and very little European research, or not enough European research. So that's an appeal to any researchers in the room who would like to work, for instance, on the cost-benefit analysis, which is which is really lacking in Europe, and which is a tool that cities need because instinctively they understand that they, with constrained budgets and also a lot of political pressure, need to justify every euro they're spending on policies and know that prevention is a good investment, but need to be able to refine that argument with more data and more information. So those are some of the main principles that the manifesto shares, and we have copies of the manifesto in German and English for you right here. So I hope you can pick one up later and actually read them in more detail, and then we can have a longer discussion. But we also included 19 thematic recommendations. So as you saw in the little film, we had these workshops that were workshops the day of the conference, but mostly had been prepared by working groups, by different networks, that were really the reflection of years of exchanges and work between cities on these different topics. This shows the variety of topics that we're working on, and which only reflects, FUS's work only reflects, obviously, the variety of topics that a mayor and local authorities are confronted with. So we're looking at, very methodological issues like the safety audits, programs, and evaluation, and the German Forum had a key role with sort of spearheading that workshop and that line of work. But we're also looking at mediation, or as the role of the police as an agent of prevention. What we can do on prevention of reoffending, how cities, and we were looking at that with the Center of European Probation, what is the role of cities in welcoming and working with reoffenders and in preventing and in providing an environment that actually prevents reoffending. We were looking at questions like sport and prevention and how large events can be safely organized in small or large contexts, the role of art and culture in prevention, and then much more sort of classic topics like urban gangs, and we just finished a project on street violence, again, I think with many partners around here. So we have a whole diversity of issues that each came out with sort of a recommendation that was both sort of what cities see, what they've established as being the most pressing issues in this field, what they recommend for the European level, for European organizations, for international organizations, but also what they commit themselves to doing. So what they're engaging themselves to doing. So I think we were hoping and trying to make this as sort of as committal as possible. Of course, it's not a legally binding document in any sort, and the German Forum. And we're very happy to announce that the German Forum signed, all of the cities signed the manifesto yesterday at their annual meeting. And while it's not a binding document in any way, it's meant to guide the issue locally, nationally, and at a European level. So it's meant to be a source of support for local authorities that are conducting policies in such and such a field, both for the general principles that in other cities, in some cities already have been adopted, for instance, by the municipal council. So it's saying, the city of Liège in Belgium, for instance, was the first to have it formally adopted by the municipal council, saying we subscribe to these European principles and values, and our policy is being being designed in the framework of a European body of knowledge and values. It's also supposed to voice the positions of local authorities, and also a means to promote and support debates with citizens in different European cities. So as some of you know, this year in 2013 is for the EU, the year of citizen, I think it's just called the Year of Citizens, or the Year of Debates with Citizens, or basically engaging with citizens. It's not a new topic at all for the EU of how you bring Europe closer to citizens and citizens closer to Europe and make it more tangible. And we want to contribute because it really fits into our own agenda as well and coincides very well with the idea that security being one of the main concerns for citizens in every community throughout Europe. It comes up time and time again on any poll that security is a main concern for citizens. The idea is to really engage at a European level with citizens through local authorities on what they see and perceive as security priorities and how they react to this manifesto and this proposition in a way. So we're going to organize manifesto days at least in 8 European cities throughout Europe for local authorities to mobilize their civil society, their local partners, and to engage in a dialogue and to use the manifesto as a proposition. It's not meant to be a Bible that's untouched for centuries or even until the next conference. It's really meant as a proposition that cities can use for their own action, but also that they can use as a starting point to engage and to discuss urban security with citizens. We found, interestingly, and maybe we can, when we open the floor to Q&A, we can, I'd be interested to hear your opinion. We found time and time again that a lot of local authorities find it difficult to discuss these issues with civil society at large. Meaning everyone knows it's an issue, but the debates often in public arenas, in town hall meetings, et cetera, become very focalized and very on either technical issues or polarized between political positions that don't give much space to an informed dialogue and to sort of an ongoing conversation. And if we believe that, security is part of a sustainable development agenda for a community, then it has to be a regular point on the agenda, and it has to be discussed in a sort of very informed but also serene manner, and not politically polarized, for instance. So another sort of outcome of these recommendations was, as I was saying, to guide the actions of local authorities, but also of the European Forum. And to implement these recommendations, I just wanted to say a few words very briefly about two projects that we're launching in line with the thematic recommendations. So the first one is about tools for the definition of local safety policies, and this is in line with the workshop and the work that I was talking about with the German forum that we did on audits and methodologies for evaluating public local security policies. So this builds also on a work that's been that the European Forum has led for a while now, and on how to implement safety audits at a local level. What sort of tools do we have? How we can bring together all these different tools beyond even audits on victimization studies, feeling of security studies, safety walks, all of the different sort of tools and methods that cities have used or are using to get a better sense of what is going on, again, at their community and more, of course, in more depth and more realistically than just police statistics, which is unfortunately still too often, which are still too often the main basis for security policies. So this program, for instance, is going to last until 2015, and we have exchanges between the member cities. So Stuttgart of Germany is part of the program, but also Rotterdam, Brussels, the French and the Italian Forum. And the idea is to sort of pool all of their expertise. They've all been developing and using different tools, to pool all of that, to work with experts outside of the cities. So bringing in, researchers and people who have been evaluating these different methods to create a European guidebook on these methodological tools. Another project that I just wanted to mention very briefly, because again, and this is a much newer topic for us, for the European Forum, but it's really comes out of the work we did in preparing and conducting the conference, is the idea of working on safer tourism. So tourism being a vector for a lot of our cities, a vector of development, and a lot of our cities are welcome a lot of tourists. As you know, Europe is a big tourist destination in general, but the security of tourists is an issue, both European and foreign tourists, and the idea is to look at all of the aspects and sort of explore, because this is really a relatively new topic for us, explore all of the aspects that a city needs to take into account, both with the tourist as a victim, so victim assistance and how you can provide victim assistance in different languages, how you can connect with the local police, how you prevent, how you can have preventative messages without scaring people off. I mean, how do you welcome someone to your city and tell them, there's this and that risk without having them run away because it's a scary message if you're too abrupt and welcoming. And maybe our colleagues from South Africa, for instance, can share a few ideas about that. Also, tourists as perpetrators of certain violences, and of course, the most obvious and which the most important maybe being sexual exploitation and sexual tourism in general. So the idea of how do you also reconcile local residents and tourists coming in and work with both of their interests? And so we're working with cities in Italy, in Alba of Italy, Barcelona, Brasov, and Munich in Germany, just to cite a few. So this again will lead to a set of sort of indicators for cities that have a tourism strategy, and for them to integrate that security lens into their tourism and vice versa. And hopefully a set of tools, including a charter, that we'll be developing also with external partners and private sector partners as well, to bring in the most diverse sort of set of stakeholders around this issue. So these are just a very quick examples. I hope we have a few minutes for discussion, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for that presentation and also for the short highlight, impromptu highlights on the World Bank. I think that was most interesting for us. You named two examples of the many projects of the EFOS. I would like to ask you or Sebastian to say a few words about another project that you have, because a lot of us are working at universities. I think the European Diploma in Urban Security would be worth a few words, at least that people know what it is, where they can find more about it. You, Sebastian?
Sebastian, it changes your...
Yeah, you can. No, yeah.
It's a good opportunity to introduce Sebastian.
Exactly. Well, thank you very much. And just a word, we are now setting up a pilot program which is called the European Diploma in Urban Security, which is a training program at the master's level, which is the result also of years of cooperation. Several of you have been in contact with us, and for years we have been trying to propose training, which we did, but we always wanted to propose training at the university and master's level, and so we have now a small consortium that started this up of universities that do have a program in this field and that teamed up together to implement a program that's particularly destined at urban security issues and people working in the field for that. So we had cooperation for 2 years together to set up a program that was what we thought a curriculum of what people working in this field, practitioners, would not need to know in crime prevention and urban security, which is proposed with 8 modules that bring together in a also interdisciplinary part different issues that needs to be taken into account. And the partners currently are the University of Toulouse, the University of Liège, the University of Bologna, of Geneva, the University of Maribor in Slovenia, and the University of Applied Science Ostfalen. You've seen that here. They present their master's program in preventive social work on crime prevention. They're also partner of this program. They contribute to it. It's an e-learning program in a first step. It's full e-learning. And well, we do a testing year now with the first set of 20 students, and we hope from next year on we can present it to the general public. You can find more information on our website on it, or on the website www.mastersinurbansecurity.eu. Thank you. Oh yes, perhaps the languages, big question actually, how to do that. It's English as the lingua franca, but all the modules are also proposed in the original language. So, and if you're a student from Slovenia, you can do parts in Slovene, one module at least, and the rest is in English. And we hope to be able to develop it, but you imagine that's quite complicated to do.
Thank you. You have another questions for Elizabeth? Yes. The microphone.
Yes. Okay, I always wonder, the typical network work consists of interested people to learn and exchange experience from one place to another in a way or another. Now, my question is the following. it's quite clear if there is a special topic, like in this project you explained about, for example, tourism and cities involved in a way or another with their economy or policies in tourism might then be especially interested to learn about the experience in another city where tourism is very strong for local politics and economy. Now, if there's not a clear topic and a clear interest, it might be much more difficult to get these interest in the local councils, in the local citizenship, to compare what's happening in, let's say, in Bielefeld, to compare what's happening in Uppsala in Sweden, or wherever it is. Now, the question is, every bigger German municipality has 4 or 5 or 6 partnerships with municipalities in Europe all over for different reasons and by different decisions to whom to partner with. And there are also a lot of twinning projects from other donors, EU-wide and so on. Is this also a field that EFUS is trying to involve, to have this issue on urban safety or urban security within, or to insert it within these partnerships, which are in many cases long-term established partnerships? No? That's the question.
I don't know if it's a question or a very good suggestion. I take it more as a suggestion. I think it's a good idea. No, traditionally we haven't. I mean, FUS is, as I said, really grown out of the will of a few mayors to work together, and so they've just become more numerous over time. There hasn't really been a strategy of sort of implementing ourselves in existing partnerships, but actually it makes sense. And I think, and a certain number of our cities are using these formal twinnings, for instance, within FUs, because also there are a lot of members within FUs that are already twinned with each other, or sometimes they will bring a city that they're twinned with to participate in a project or to take part. That's true within Europe. For instance, there are a lot of Franco-German twinnings that are, sort of nice to activate. And often mayors, we found, and I hope I don't offend anyone, but by saying this, but often mayors have found twinning projects to be somewhat sort of empty of meaning. I mean, they're very formal, and they send like kids to each other's schools and they cut ribbons, but then they don't have much to talk about. So in some cases, yes, they are interested in talking about security. We've also found it's interesting with third countries, or so-called third countries outside of EU. More and more of our cities have twinnings or programs or whatever with countries outside of the EU. For instance, if they have a lot of citizens from that city that are originally from another country. And so we've worked with, we've used that, we're increasingly using that connection, because I didn't have time to talk about our international work, because our main focus is Europe, but of course with a lot of interactions with other cities outside of Europe, including in Africa, namely in Africa and some in Latin America as well.
Other questions? Yes, please. Elizabeth, could you stand up? It's better for the mic.
Sure. Sorry. Sorry.
No. Thanks very much, Elizabeth, for the overview. From what I understand, IFOS is a platform mainly for exchange at a political level between mayors. Can you talk a little bit more about at the level of administrations, technicians, how they are involved in IFOS and how exchange happens at that level, but also you spoke about the kind of services the network provides. Can you talk a little bit more about how that actually works in practice, please?
Yeah, I talked a lot about mayors and sort of the exchanges between them, because I really wanted to focus and share with you the manifesto, which is more of a political document, and which was, of course, written up and drafted and reflects more of a political position. But actually, FUS is a lot about technicians or people in the administrations working together. So they're really two levels, and that are actually are often combined. And what's interesting, and this is sort of a side, but is often through exchange programs within FUs, it's often a first opportunity or a rare opportunity for a local elected official and the person in the administration to actually work together. So to give you a very concrete example, on the audits, for instance, we will work with mainly the head of the administration, the local administration, so it would be, they have different names in different countries, but it would be the local security coordinator or the local security policy officer. The person in the municipality who's in charge of that sector will be working with him or her, and then they will bring their local elected official on selected moments. But they'll be doing the main work of exchanging practices and working with their counterparts. So for instance, on the audit project, we will be, or on the tourism, it's actually a relatively similar methodology. We'll be organizing peer visits according to each other's strengths and needs. So there's a first meeting where everybody goes around the table sort of presenting what their strength in whatever topic it is in tourism is, and what their main need is, and what they're currently working on, and what they would like support on. So they'll say, we're at the very beginning. We have a city, Brașov in Romania, which is at the very beginning of their tourism strategy. They're here to explore and see, okay, we have to have a strategy. How do we start? We have cities like Rome that are extremely, obviously, no news to you that Rome has a tradition being a very touristic city. So they're sort of refining instruments, and they'll come in saying, our problem is this type of tourism or this type of behavior of tourists that we really want to tackle. So each will identify and share sort of their strengths and weaknesses, and then we'll organize peer visits according to that and provide assistance and help cities provide each other assistance according to those very specific needs. So we'll also have, and this is always an important aspect of bringing external expertise when needed. The idea is that cities have the expertise and have a lot to learn from each other, but of course they also need, in some cases, a university professor or a drug expert from an NGO that's specialized in risk reduction. So we'll bring in whoever at the European level we feel is best placed to support cities in a very practical problem. So I can't give you, for instance, a template of a traditional program because there is none. And I think that's, of course, what makes it interesting for us as people who work at the FUs, but also I think makes it relevant. It's because it's really custom made according to the topics. But the idea is always of this sort of pooling the expertise and the knowledge of cities and also sharing their needs. I think one of the advantages of being a network is, and doing this work with cities that have sort of a long-standing involvement, is that they're more easily able to share also their needs and their weaknesses and learn from each other's mistakes. So there's less of, contrary to a sort of very short partnership or punctual sort of relationship, they don't feel the need to publicize their policy, basically, but they also can open up and say, this is where we failed and this is why we failed, and maybe this is, how we overcame that obstacle, and learn from that, from each other's mistakes as well as each other's successes.
Thank you. We are right on time. Thank you again, Elisabeth, for your presentation. And